26th meeting of the Economy Committee. Obviously, due to ongoing COVID-19 safeguarding measures, some members will be attending this morning's meeting via video conference, and our witnesses will also be briefing us via video conference. The meeting will be broadcast live, but it will end at 12 noon. That is, the broadcast will end at 12 noon, even if our meeting continues. It's regrettable, but cannot be avoided due to limited assembly resources. A recording of the meeting up to 12 noon will be made available on the committee's web pages on the Assembly website following the meeting. Just to remind members to mute their tablets by pushing F4. Feedback there. So moving on then to item number 1, apologies. We have apologies from Stuart Dixon due to ongoing illness, and also this morning from John Stewart. I don't think there's everybody else.
Nope, everybody else is here, Chair.
John.
Item number 2 then is our draft minutes. There is a copy of those at page 5 of your pack from the meeting held on the 24th of June. Are members content that those are an accurate reflection?
Great.
Okay, then item number 3, chairperson's business. We have no business this morning.
No items, Chair.
So moving on then to item number 4 is our oral briefing via Starley from departmental officials on Brexit. There is,
Our officials are there. There's 4 officials.
Yeah. Great. So there's a clerk's memo at page 13 of your pack. There is a briefing paper from the Assembly's EU Affairs Manager at page 18. There's a briefing paper from Derry Chamber of Commerce in relation to the EU exit transition period at page 41. And there is a paper from the EU Affairs Manager at page 3 of your table papers.
So when you announce the officials, if you just say, can I bring into the spotlight?
Okay. Will they all come into the spotlight?
They will all be brought into the spotlight then, yeah.
Okay, so we have 4 officials with us this morning from the EU Exit Preparation and Transition Group, and I'm going to ask to bring into the spotlight Paul, Mary, Julia and Victor, please.
And magically they will appear,
There we go.
Chair. There we go.
So, I'd like to invite the officials then to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members. So obviously we had an informal briefing from Paul on the 18th of June.
Yes, Chair.
So I suppose it will just be some update of what we had since then.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thanks.
Yeah, okay, so thanks very much. Paul Brocart, so I head up the exit transition group. So I'm joined by Julia, who leads the protocol, Victor, who heads up our trade and migration, and then Mary, who leads on legislation and our readiness. So I'll provide you just an overview across the 3 divisions of the group, and then rather than individual presentations from the guys, we'll open to questions from members. So I think that
Paul,
the biggest change since we...
So can I just interrupt you a wee second? It's a little bit low this morning, so we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. I think we're going to try and
No, it's not that. It's done from downstairs.
So we're just asking broadcasting to turn it up a little
maximise
bit.
their volume. And Paul, if you just speak very loud too, that would really help.
Okay, is that a little clearer?
It's a bit better. We're still working on that. Get Sinead to let them know downstairs. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, do you want me to try and carry on, or
It's a bit
pause
better.
until you
It's a
get
bit
the
better.
technical issues?
Yeah, no, if you want to go
Go on ahead. Just be very loud, Paul. Sorry.
Speak loudly.
How technical are we?
Okay, I'll try. So the biggest change, I think, since we last provided a briefing to you, in fact, it was on the day that we were in front of the committee, the UK government published its command paper. So there, I'm sure members will have had a chance to read it, but we can just quickly run through the issues. I guess the summary would be there's good news and also some remaining uncertainty in the paper. Our Minister welcomed the commitments from UK government on unfettered access. I think that was positive to see that. We're keen to see more detail on how that will be delivered. The command paper also included more detail for the first time that import declarations will be required for businesses purchasing goods from GB. While that in itself is positive that we're getting that clarity, that raises a concern about the capacity and capability of our businesses to complete those declaration forms. And we've previously discussed the particularly low preparedness levels amongst our SME populations, which, given the nature of our economy as an SME economy, is a key concern. There also remains a question, a lack of detail around tariffs, and in particular goods which are considered to be at risk within the terms of the protocol. That is still to be discussed between the UK and the EU within the joint committee structures. So we continue to monitor that very closely. And also there are issues around the implementation of the protocol, so that don't require a negotiation as such between the UK and the EU, but require assurance from UK towards the EU about the implementation. So in particular, that's the sort of customs processes that will be required, the need for goods regulation and associated compliance with that, and then VAT. Similarly to the import declarations issue, we're acutely aware that sort of levels of preparedness across those three themes is particularly low. So there is an urgent need for more guidance from the UK for businesses here to understand what those trading arrangements will be and the steps that they need to take to prepare for them. So there is a clear role still in this phase for UKG to provide that level of clarity. But I think also worth noting and recognising that there's a role for the EU in this space. And I think through the negotiations, our minister is seen to see more of the de-dramatisation and pragmatism language that we've sort of seen from EU negotiators in the past. And see that better reflected in the sort of the technical documents in particular, but also in the outcome of the negotiations as we move forward. So guidance and information is one thing, and we're keen for that to come as quickly as possible. The next issue is what do businesses do with that, and how do they prepare? Obviously, we are now into July. There are 6 months left until the end of the transition period. That is a limited amount of time for our businesses to adapt to any changes. So we're conscious that there will be a need to support them and adjust and adapt to these new conditions. So on the protocol side, there are, to summarise, the activities that are taking place and continue to take place. I think there's sort of two broad categories of the work. First of all is that influencing and informing, so looking to ensure that decision makers understand the circumstances there as best as possible, and also to ensure that the implementation of the protocol works in a way that suits Northern Ireland businesses. And then the second theme of work, which sort of I've covered in almost all those bullet points, is supporting businesses to prepare as best as possible. I think that will characterise almost everything that we do over the next 6 months. Moving on to the next area of work, and then into Victor's brief onto migration policy. So the Migration Advisory Committee launched a consultation on the shortage occupation list that closed on the 24th of June. Our minister has provided sort of inputs into that and continue to make the case that a UKG migration policy needs to recognise the specific needs of the Northern Ireland economy and the Northern Ireland labour market. And we continue to make that case through the MAC and also to Home Office. Wider developments are that we understand the Home Office will reinitiate stakeholder engagement on their points-based system. And then finally, on the migration aspect, we are mindful of settled status and the need for, in economic terms, but also the wider sort of community and social impacts, is that people that have chosen to make Northern Ireland their home, that they are able and to go through the settled status scheme. So the current figures are that there's almost 60,000 applicants of those living in Northern Ireland. So while this continues to be a TO lead, it's an area that we are particularly interested in and keen to see as many of those, as I said, that choose to live and work here to take up the settled status scheme and continue to sort of make Northern Ireland their home. Onto the Next area of Victor's brief is the sort of what the future economic partnership, and this describes the wider UK EU negotiations. So you'll be aware that we are now into another round of negotiations. Key themes or key obstacles from those negotiations at this present time are sort of like the governance arrangements and level playing field issues that you will have picked up through the media. I think there's a clear sense that both sides have set out their negotiating positions and there is some distance between them. So it's likely that a political intervention will be required to bridge those particular gaps. From our perspective, key issues that we're interested in are the arrangements for state aid and clarity for businesses and government about what that regime will be in Northern Ireland. On tradable services, key issues within that negotiation brief will be the qualifications and the mutual recognition of those qualifications, and also arrangements for data, in particular data adequacy agreements. And then finally, turning to our energy, while the single electricity market is a feature of the protocol, it is also dependent upon GB SEM trading relationships, which it is caught up in the wider UK EU negotiations. So keen to see the issues for our energy guys addressed as quickly as possible. Moving then into the wider trade space, which is international trade policy. This is a busy and active area of work. There are now 4 simultaneous trade negotiations that the UK is engaged with. So you'll be aware that US and Japan negotiations have already kicked off. Australian negotiations are due to launch next week. And then the UK New Zealand negotiations will follow shortly after that. So, it's a busy area of work. Across all of those negotiations, we are keen to press the importance or keen to double down on the UK's commitment that trade policy works for the whole of the UK, and that needs to include Northern Ireland. And then from our perspective, that means looking at how these arrangements could impact and benefit our trade with GB, the Republic of Ireland, the rest of the EU, and also our third country trading partners. Separate but related to this area is also free ports, and just a very brief update in that there is a consultation on free ports in the UK, which is due to close on the 13th of July. So while this is led by colleagues in the Department of Finance, because they're the lead interlocutor with HM Treasury, we're working very closely with them to understand how free ports may benefit the Northern Ireland economy and ensure that our contribution to that consultation and engagement with Treasury includes those interests of businesses and consumers in Northern Ireland. Moving on to Mary's area, which previously we've spoken about the legislation and the concerns that we have just in both the sheer volume of legislation and the amount of time that we have available to progress that. It is a significant challenge that we remain concerned about, and we also are acutely aware of the vital role that you will play in scrutinising that legislation. I think there's a challenge that we face in many cases, the amount of information that we're able to share with you and the amount of time that we're able to provide to give the committee to scrutinise the legislation can be sort of driven by what's happening in UK government, and then delays in Whitehall progressing its legislation has an immediate and damaging knock-on effect on our ability to inform you. The Minister's letter to the committee sort of set out the current position that we have. We're expecting there to be 15 statutory rules that will be required to go through the Assembly, and then 17 statutory instruments, which will be required to obviously go through Parliament. Now, that is an indicative assessment at this stage. Our experience from the legislative changes that were required for no deal suggests that number might come down a little bit as decisions are made to group either SRs or SIs, but that's the current position. What we'd like to do is come back to you with more detail as quickly as possible on the timescales for them. So we're working Mary's team is working incredibly hard to try and close the gaps in information, so we can give you something that looks similar to a critical path of each of the SIs and SRs, and more importantly, timescales included within that path. Another sort of key area of Mary's work is operational readiness. So in the previous sort of preparations, this would have been described as Operation Yellowhammer, ensuring that government services continue to operate in a no deal. That work is now restarting as we sort of near the end of the transition period, and the exam question sort of being set with all departments is to ensure that our statutory services continue to function on the 1st of January. So there's a whole government sort of work programme there, which is led within Northern Ireland from TEO, but also obviously deeply dependent upon activities that are being driven by Cabinet Office, which is an important and pressing area of work. And then the final area that we wanted to provide you a brief update on is business readiness. So I mentioned a couple of times, particularly at the start, the challenge in relation to business readiness, and we have spoken before about this particular issue. We're conscious that there is a limiting factor in that we need to understand the training arrangements before businesses can properly prepare. It is likely that information will come late in the day, but we're not going to sit around and wait for that to come. So there is activity that we're taking now to help businesses adapt, and I think that activity is being taken forward in the context of COVID. As a department, we are very conscious of the need to support businesses, and interventions that we make to strengthen the economy and support businesses to adapt to COVID also need to have the need to prepare and adapt for the protocol and wider Brexit changes. So we've been working with our arms and bodies, so Invest Northern Ireland, Tourism NI, and Intertrade at this stage to understand, given the levels of uncertainty, what can we do? And so through the monitoring process that it was announced by the Minister of Finance yesterday, and working with our arms and bodies, we've looked at just under around £25 million worth of interventions, which is spread around just under 12 million of resource, 3 million capital, and then 10 million of FTC, so financial transaction capital, and developed a suite of interventions that can help improve businesses' operational processes, improve planning, introduce new technologies, and then look to strengthen supply chain resilience. All of which, as I said, look to both support businesses adapt to the new normal that is created by to COVID-19, but also help them to prepare for changes that we expect to be coming down the line as a result of principally the implementation of the protocol, but also wider changes as a result of EU exit negotiations. Now, obviously, that's not a one-stop or a single and final intervention. We'll continue to review the need to provide support for businesses. That will become infinitely easier with more information becomes on stream and more guidance becomes available about what the trading relationships are. I think the next milestone in terms of spending interventions will be October monitoring and the autumn statement from the Chancellor, or autumn budget rather. So that's a very sort of high level summary across the work of the three divisions. Myself and the team will be very happy to take sort of questions either across any of that brief, or if there's issues that we've not covered in that presentation, very happy to pick them up if we've missed any issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I guess since the publishing of the command paper and the commitments that were made in it in relation to the future arrangements, it has been clear that there is that lack of detail underpinning all of that. And over the past couple of weeks, we've seen a number of business organisations and some research continuing to highlight the concerns around the lack of information available to businesses to help them prepare. And obviously you have outlined some of the work that is still going on around that. That the EU still feels that there's insufficient progress in terms of the implementation of the protocol. Obviously, yesterday would have been the last day that an extension could have been called, but obviously we had seen, a couple of weeks ago, the British government's intentions clearly that they weren't going to do that. And obviously there is really tight time frames now up until the end of the year to get through the level of negotiation in detail and everything else that we need to see to properly implement the protocol and conclude a future arrangement negotiation. So that's a big challenge, and I think you've outlined some of that in your briefing in terms of the legislative framework that will need to be put in place and the burden that there is there, and also that continuing lack of clarity for businesses to enable them to prepare. So, just maybe like to explore that in a wee bit more detail. The planning for the legislative framework you have, it says that you can come back to us with a wee bit more detail on that. That will be useful for us in terms of even understanding what needs to be done before the end of the year. And if you can maybe outline a wee bit of the types of SRs and SIs that are coming down the track, what those are going to include.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, we're keen to come to you with as much information as possible, and that's the task that Mary's team are currently working on, as I mentioned, to close the gaps where we currently don't have dates, particularly on the SIs where they've been laid or been taken forward by Whitehall departments. Particularly, I guess, the most sort of affected part of the department is on energy side. So the legislative requirements that sort of are necessary as a result of the protocol, including arrangements for the single electricity market, takes up the lion's share of the changes. But it's not exclusive to energy. There are other parts of the department that are also affected, and we'd be happy to come and provide you with a list of those, sort of 15 and 17 respectively. And then, as I mentioned, a critical path as we see it of the stages that are necessary to progress them in order that the legislative changes are made by the 1st of January. Mary, is there anything that you would like to add from the work that the team is taking forward?
We have to ask them.
No, Mary should be in now. Mary appears to have dropped off.
Have we lost Mary? Mary's connection.
No, Mary's gone into the audience. Can we put Mary back into the spotlight? Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mary, did you hear me?
Right. I did hear you. So hopefully you can hear and hopefully see me at the moment. The both SRs and SIs, there is a lot in there that's to do with, as Paul has said, the single electricity market and energy. An example of one of the SRs that has recently put through that the committee has been involved in is on the mutual recognition of professional qualifications. So quite a number of the SRs will then build on kind of new policies, whereas the SIs are about rectifying the legislation that is required just to let us leave. And indeed, there were elements of the mutual recognition of professional qualifications in that space as well. We do have also a number of SRs on health and safety, for example, on chemicals and how to deal with the chemicals regime, and that's very actively in discussion at the minute as to how that is handled. And also in terms of the going through the Assembly Economic Business Regulation and a number of areas to be rectified when we leave the EU, and also a big dependency on the protocol and the detail of the negotiations between the EU and the UK on all of that. Employment regulation and business regulation. That's one that is quite difficult to pin down in terms of either content or timing at the moment. But certainly we do press within our own department all of the different policy areas to pin down content, dates, timings, so that we can give you a critical path and involve you in those as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really helpful. In terms of the support for businesses, obviously we're all very aware of the difficult economic circumstances that businesses are facing already with COVID and the impact that has had, and now having to prepare for whatever circumstances are going to be there at the end of the transition period. And you have outlined, Paul, in yours about the interventions that are being put in place in terms of financial support type interventions. But in terms of the education or training resources that are being made available to businesses, what does that look like? Obviously, the HMRC have made available 50 million in training for British businesses. Are ours able to access that, or is additional support being made available to businesses here?
Julia can pick up the HMRC point on the availability of customs training. I think the key issue is that so we're ready to provide that level of intervention, and we've good experience through working with Invest and I and Intertrade Ireland in particular in the run up to No Deal, and they led an intensive programme of education of getting out there and speaking to as many businesses as possible. So there's, we have a good feel of what needs to be done. The problem is that we need to be able to communicate with accuracy and clarity to businesses over what they're required to do, and at this stage we're not able to do that. I emailed the lesson in memory for a personal reflection of No Deal, and the frustrations that businesses felt as when government gets in front of a group of businesses, it's incredibly important that they have something to say. If there is that ongoing lack of clarity and businesses don't get the information that they need, then frustration quite reasonably sort of surfaces very quickly. So I think we're ready to go. There's a program that we can deliver, and in partnership with Invest and Intertrade pretty quickly. But we need to know the terms and the arrangements that businesses are going to have to adapt to. So particularly the pieces that I mentioned on customs, good regulation, and VAT are all significant gaps currently that we're not able to explain to businesses what the future will look like. Julia, is anything you'd like to add in terms of that piece?
Yes, just in terms of the question around HMRC, yes, I've clarified with HMRC that businesses here can access that funding. Of course, one of the reasons I asked that of HMRC is because we are in a different position to businesses in GB, and our preparation is a little bit different in that the government has been a bit clearer about what will be required for businesses trading with the EU. So anyway, in broader terms, we know there's been quite a bit of customs training over the past few years, and that quite a bit of that continues at the moment. In that, speaking to the Chamber of Commerce or Chartered Accountants, there's a constant level of demand, I suppose, about customs training. Invest and Intertrade both continue to have resources available. Whether online resources, probably mostly at the moment, or Brexit preparation grants, they're all continue to be available. But the real gap, people can do the customs training that's out there at the moment, but the next step in actually getting people prepared is having real clarity on what they will actually need to do. So the people who are in finance posts in businesses, they will have to prepare for VAT, they'll have to prepare for customs, that would be a lot on its own when you think of the resources that businesses have and the and there may be financial decisions that have had to be made very quickly over the last few years. That function in many companies will be under a lot of pressure. And so we need to make it as easy as possible for those people. We need to have clarity on what they will need to do and support available to them. So although there's been a lot of training to date, the next step really requires information on exactly what they have to do.
No, yeah, I think that's a point well made, that is the detail now that's needed to help support businesses through that next stage. And Paul, you mentioned the kind of types of areas of work that is still being done by the department and around the implementation, ensuring that, the implementation of the protocol, ensuring that it suits business. Obviously, the engagement forum is an important part of that, and there has been some frustration from business here that engagement hasn't been as intense or as required as to actually make clear what business needs. So how is that being managed? Is that being stepped up? And are those who are leading on the negotiations in Britain clear on the impact that it's going to have on business here?
So just for clarity, when you refer to the engagement forum, is that the engagement forum is chaired by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland? Obviously it's an NIO lead. I think that the feedback businesses has been communicated to them. We're not involved in that as such, and can't control the amount of information that's transmitted to them, unfortunately. But certainly, from our perspective, and when our minister engages with her counterparts in London, they're the primary points that are landed, and at official level, we continue to sort of make that understood. And our counterparts in Whitehall certainly understand that, I think, and are keen to present as much information as possible. The challenge that they face is that this is part of a negotiation, and the challenge with Brexit in its entirety is that everything is connected, and the negotiations get tied up because of those interconnected issues. From our perspective, as quickly as possible, we need to cut through those and provide businesses with the information they need. So both sides of the table, both the UK and the EU, need to sort of bridge those gaps. Recognise the importance of this to the Northern Ireland economy, and then the consequential impacts on everything, every part of life here in Northern Ireland. Reach those agreements and then communicate those arrangements to businesses and communities as quickly as possible, and then make sure that there are support mechanisms in place that they can take on board that information and then adapt their systems and processes within the very short amount of time that's available.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's a very fair frustration that businesses will be feeling, that it could be really late in the day before they have the detail that they need to properly prepare. I'm going to open it up for some questions. John O'Dowd.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just want to return to the two subjects the Chair has raised as well, in terms of the amount of legislation, regulations that the committee is going to have to deal with in the months ahead. Can we be assured that the committee will have sufficient time to scrutinise the legislation? I note in other committees there has been concerns raised around a number of LCMs that have come forward, statutory rules that have come forward, etc., which the committee simply hasn't had the time to properly scrutinise. And I would be concerned, given the impact of this legislation, that if the committee is not given proper time to scrutinise legislation, then there's always a danger that further down the road there may be flaws found in that legislation, unintended consequences of that legislation, or long-term problems as a result of that legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be
if I could just come in. Okay.
So go ahead, Mary.
Really, it's actually quite difficult to give that reassurance at the minute, because of the scale of what's coming the committee's way. I think working with our colleague, it is likely that some pieces of legislation will be grouped with similar items, which hopefully will give the committee more time to scrutinise and to do their job properly. It's always at the forefront of our mind to facilitate.
Lost Mary.
I think Mary's frozen.
Oh.
Paul, are you still?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I have to pick up. I think Mary's probably going to go on to say that something along the lines of that we share your concerns. Absolutely. I think the challenge is basically that we're in a chain of information, and so the necessary information on the implementation of the protocol is required before we can do the drafting. And then if it relates to SIs, then we're required, there's a requirement for Whitehall to share those SIs as soon as possible. And both of those create time pressures on us as a department, and unfortunately the consequences, they then roll through to the committee in the amount of time that you get to scrutinise. So we're acutely aware of that, and we'll work as hard as we possibly can to give you the most amount of time as possible, and be as transparent as we can in terms of what we're expecting to come down the line, when we expect to see it, and then as soon as it's available, we'll be sharing it with you.
I appreciate the fact, and I know officials will do everything within their power to make sure that the relevant legislation is in front of us, and a lot of this is outside your hands. But I do have serious concerns that we are going to end up with hasty legislation, which we will regret at our leisure. On another point, Paul, you had mentioned during your briefing that there was £25 million secured for supporting businesses and business readiness. Could you give us further details on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Would it be helpful if we provided you with a briefing note of the interventions? Would that be better?
That
Would you like
would
me
be
to just
useful,
run
yes,
through them?
thank you.
Yeah, okay. Effectively, the exam question we've set ourselves is that COVID is a huge shock to the economy, and we need to ensure businesses adapt to the new normal. As a department, as we intervene in the economy, it's essential that those interventions do two things: that they help businesses adapt, but also help them prepare for the protocol. What we don't want to see are interventions that are made now, but then are undone by any impacts of the protocol later down the line. So to meet that value for money for test, the interventions do those two things: support adaptation, but also help to prepare. And we'd be more than happy to provide you with a note, and then come back if there's some questions that you have on that note.
Okay, thank you.
That would be useful, thank you. Christopher.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. In your opening remarks, you made reference to free ports, and I think that the development of free ports in Northern Ireland could go a long way to helping us ease the bureaucratic burden upon our businesses. I'm just wondering, could you talk to the benefits of free ports and what the advantages would be of free ports in Northern Ireland?
Victor, do you want to pick that one up?
Do you want me to come in? I just want to make sure you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
That's good, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we have been working closely with the Department of Finance, who is leading this sort of piece from a Northern Ireland executive perspective, reflecting the Treasury lead that there is in England. So, our job, I suppose, at the minute is looking at what the proposals are, assessing what they might mean for Northern Ireland, looking to how they could be crafted and understanding how they could be crafted to make sure benefits are realised for Northern Ireland. So there's, at the core of all of this is the concept of tariff inversion, so that you could bring in components into a free port tariff-free, which may, were they not being brought into a free port, have to pay pretty significant tariffs. They're then assembled into a product that can be brought out into the broader economy or exported at a much lower tariff, because the finished product is just faces a lower tariff than components that go into it. So there are examples that are given to this internationally, areas like
Rotterdam.
chemicals, like automotive, indeed agri, where there is the potential for free ports to deliver benefits. The UK proposal is to wrap that up in a broader, attractive package around tax incentives for innovation, and all of those kind of things. So planning incentives as well. So that's the sort of the concept. Yeah. I think there are a lot of questions that still need to be answered. We have, as part of this and working again with DOF, been seeking to make sure our stakeholders have a voice and can raise similar questions and seeking clarification. So there was a really good set of engagement over the last couple of weeks as part of the consultation process, where quite a number of our stakeholders were able to engage directly with the Treasury to raise questions, aspirations, concerns around all of this. So I think, there are, I think it's important to really explore this concept, understand it clearly, and then look to how it can work in a Northern Ireland context and deliver the kind of benefits we would want it to be able to deliver.
In terms of the, excuse me, in terms of the scale of what the government at Westminster is talking about, I recall, I think it was in 2018, that Tina McKenzie, in her capacity as policy chair of the FSB for Northern Ireland, suggested making the entirety of Northern Ireland a free port. I'm just wondering, are we talking here Belfast and Londonderry and the international airport designated as free ports, or are we talking something on a bigger scale than that?
Certainly what's in the mix at the minute is that these are located at or close to or around ports. There's a concept that has been put forward by UK government that there could be links between free ports, so corridors and all of that kind of thing. But the kind of scale that it would cover the totality of Northern Ireland is not sort of on the table in terms of what we have seen so far. I think there's question about how, and these are questions that our stakeholders have been asking as well, how would this operate in the context of the protocol? And, certainly there is I think the consultation from Treasury is pretty open about this. There needs to be control of goods entering and leaving free ports for customs purposes, which requires security, to be available, checks and all of that kind of thing. So I think that's geographically, therefore, that sort of points to having these in finite, defined places.
So a Belfast to Londonderry corridor with the airport in between?
You could think of a lot of options within that, couldn't you?
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Yeah, Victor, can I just pick up on that? Obviously, there are concerns around free ports as well in terms of being linked to tax avoidance and tax evasion and criminal activity. And you've mentioned there, the types of checks that might be needed in and out of ports. So what kind of consideration is being given to all of that in the context of what is being proposed by the British government?
Yeah, very much. These are questions that are being asked. So I think the response that we are getting and that a Treasury have given our stakeholders is, look, this is a consultation. We are open and listening to ideas about how this might operate. But they're certainly they are keen to avoid these becoming sort of. And there are examples around the globe where free ports are used for tax evasion purposes. They're used to store valuable items of art or whatever else, jewellery. Certainly at the concept, the heart of this is something much more production based. That it actually leads to value-added activity, but there's still a lot of flesh to be put on the bones to all of this. I mean, another issue that we have been raising, and no doubt will continue to raise, is just the issue around displacement. If there is the opportunity in this is that it brings new activity into Northern Ireland, activity that we wouldn't otherwise get, and that it helps drive a broader strategy of economic growth. What is, I suppose, a fear that we would want to avoid is that what it actually does is draw in activity that is already in Northern Ireland or would already be in Northern Ireland, and draws it out of other locations and into a free port. I think that is something that would, it's the former rather than the latter that we would want these to deliver for us.
And also how it would interact with the protocol, for example, in relation to state aid, could potentially be difficult as well. And the commitments, I suppose, that in terms of the protocol, one of the main driving forces towards that was the avoidance of any hard border on the island of Ireland. So, what kind of security would be required around a free port area on the land as well?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right, Chair, that this is sort of a microcosm of the broader issues that need to be and are being explored as part of the protocol, and how the offer that is being put out by UK government can manage the complexities of all of that. You've mentioned some of them there. I think that's a really important dimension as this goes into further design.
Okay, thank you. Sinead?
Okay, thank you everybody for your presentation so far. It's probably the same as other members have said. We as a committee are very concerned about the volume and quantity of work to be done in such a short time frame, particularly around legislation, but also around scrutiny. Yesterday we had the Environment Bill, and really there was more questions than answers in relation to actually giving legislative consent to that from the devolved parliaments. So we expect more of that coming through, and more frustration. And I suppose we had a meeting with the House of Lords yesterday, and they too within the Parliament are having difficulty around scrutiny of the various components of our transition and our exit. So that is a major concern for all of us. We're kind of running out of road, and our businesses are extremely frustrated in relation to the lack of clarity of where the landing space is going to be, and that's difficult for them to prepare. Everybody's talking about training and preparing and certs of origins and customs, but none of us know exactly what any of those requirements are going to be. So it's like, going on your holidays, as I said yesterday, and told to pack your bag, but you don't know where you're going, and you don't know what to bring. So it's really, really difficult. But one of the things that I probably want to ask Paul is, Northern Ireland been outside the EU free trade agreements and having an uncertain situation regarding the UK trade agreements. Have you progressed that any further? Can we give any more clarity to what our particular unique situation is in that space? And should we be having more emphasis as an economy, and this committee to explore ways of maybe looking at higher end services, as opposed to developing higher end services, as opposed to trying to deal with the manufacturing aspect if we're going to be damaged by it? Have you given any consideration to just where we are in that space at the moment?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then if you just pick up the detail on the research that we're doing. So the command paper repeats the commitment of UK government that Northern Ireland can access the benefits of the UK trade policy, and that's that continues to frame our minister's engagement with her counterparts in the Department for International Trade, actually seeing the detail of that, of how our businesses can access those trade deals. So that's the first part of that question is NI's access to UK trade policy. There's a second part of your question that referred to EU FTAs, and Victor can talk to us through research we're doing about components and raw materials that start here, are moved south for processing and then exported across the world, and sometimes under EU FTAs, and we're trying to paint a picture of how important that is for our economy, and then put that to the decision makers, and Victor can pick up that detail. And then in terms of what does the future economy look like? So that we, as a department, we published the Rebuilding a Stronger Economy paper a couple of weeks ago now, and that talked to areas of strength where we, in the Northern Ireland economy, which includes sort of those big data was how we described it, and that's absolutely sort of part of the economy where we're looking to grow, but also thinking of. It also includes the life sciences and advanced manufacturing, because they are existing strengths. So I think, notwithstanding the uncertainty that those sectors face, I think given they compete on a global stage already, so we need to be able to find a way to support them businesses into that sort of post-transition period world. Victor, do you want to pick up on the research that we're doing at this stage about that NI content moving south, and then the links to negotiations on cumulation in the UK FTA?
Yeah, of course. Happy to do that, Paul. And certainly, I mean, this is a point that is very much in our focus, just that link that we have in terms of supply chains, manufacturers in Northern Ireland exporting into producers in the south, who then export through EU FTAs. So the issue around what is on the table and the protocol at the minute, while we will continue to be able to sustain those exports into the south, into the EU under the protocol, it does not give us the ability to export through EU FTAs as if Northern Ireland was EU content, and therefore there is a danger that certain products could start getting frozen out of supply chain linkages into the south, into the EU. So we're doing research to examine what sectors are particularly exposed in all of that, and what what countries of export would we be starting to lose access to through that. Dairy stands out, and we'll bring that work to you whenever it reaches a conclusion, and we're in the final state. We're reaching the final stages of that, so that's a good place to be. But certainly, initial findings, and this is reflected also by voices from the sectors themselves. Dairy has a degree of exposure to all of this, and there is therefore a real desire to make sure that the relationship that the UK has with the EU will help mitigate the risks for dairy and for others that are exposed. Beverages have an issue in this from this perspective as well. Paul, you mentioned accumulation, so this is the ability to treat product from the UK as if it were EU product for the purposes of export to countries where both the UK and the EU have a trading relationship. Now that accumulation requires the third country to agree to that accumulation, so it's a tripartite type piece to it. But in the first instance, to unlock it, we really need the UK to agree strong broad rules of accumulation with the EU. They've asked for that, so that's certainly very clearly identified in the legal text that was published by the UK. The issue is Brussels have a concern that until broader issues around level playing field governance are resolved, they are less inclined to engage on this issue. So I think from our perspective, we just need to make sure that that kind of evidence and work is played into Whitehall to make sure they're aware of the risks for Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland sectors, that kind of issue isn't traded away, remains as a priority in the negotiation piece for the UK government.
Thank you for that. Just another, quick question. None of these are quick questions because they're all so complex. But in relation to scrutiny for the international trade agreements, because I'm aware that, they could have an adverse effect again on our economy. And our particular economy here in Northern Ireland, maybe agri-food, or for example, if the New Zealand international trade agreements included lamb or beef or whatever. So how can this committee be sure that there is adequate scrutiny happening for Northern Ireland's particular position on these agreements?
We have been, I suppose, a very strong ambition in all of this is to make sure that there is heavy scrutiny applied to the UK's new trade policy, and that has been, there have been strong commitments made in this by UK government. They have said that UK trade policy must work for all parts of the UK. We've been building relationships both at ministerial and at official level. So I sit, for instance, on a senior officials group on international trade with Scottish and Welsh counterparts. Our minister sits on the ministerial forum for trade with DIT, chaired by DIT, and we're pushing them to extend the envelope in all of that to make sure we do have a role and an ability to play in our interests in all of this. So I think that remains important, and in terms of a role for the committee. I think we need to, as these things develop, make sure that we're sharing that kind of information with you so that you have the ability to scrutinise it. I mean, these things remain in the reserved, they're not in the devolved space. So we're doing this through, seeking to make sure we hold the UK to its ambition of making sure this works for all parts of the UK, and making the case that that cannot be done unless there is a really strong voice for Northern Ireland, and that's all stakeholders, political, consumers, producers. All of those kind of issues need to be heavily played into this.
Thank you. And we have a very strong voice. The problem is the UK hasn't listened to it at any stage, and we have fallen victim of the fact that we've been ignored every step of the way, and we are where we are today. And we were told that there was going to be no water down the Irish Sea, and now we're looking at infrastructure and pretty heavy infrastructure too in our ports and in both directions. East-west, west-east. So I am pretty sceptical about any promises made and any declarations. They'll suit themselves, but we have to keep on top of it as much as we can. Thank you.
Gary? Can we bring Gary into the spotlight? Can you hear us, Gary?
Mute.
Are you muted?
On mute.
Everybody stares to
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. I could hear you, but I wasn't too sure whether it was in the spotlight or not. But there you go, I'm in the spotlight. And In terms of the 25, I appreciate it, and I would appreciate the seeing sight of the paper around the 25 million intervention. Could you give us a brief breakdown as to, in regards to that 25 million, I just need clarity, was that solely in relation to COVID-19, or is it been looked at in terms of trying to kill two birds with the one stone and bring the EU into it as well?
No, absolutely. It's to do both. So the objective we set ourselves was to help businesses adapt to the new normal created by COVID-19, but also to make sure that those adaptations also help them prepare. So in our there was an extensive exercise across the three ALBs. The prioritisation of schemes was on that basis, on the basis to which interventions help businesses adapt, but also prepare.
No, thanks for that, Paul, and I look forward to seeing the paper. I think it is important that businesses can be as ready as they can given the information that's available. But as COVID-19 has taught us, we do live in a very fragile world. All of the plans that we put in place, sometimes they don't go to plan. So we have to be mindful that that's ever changing. I'm mindful as well, Christopher, my colleague, had mentioned around the free ports issue. It's something that I have a particular interest in as well. And I know that some of the ports are giving evidence today to the Infrastructure Committee at Stormont, and I think that they're raising some genuine issues. And one of the issues that has been raised by Foyleport or Londonderry Port is the fact that they are concerned that they do see opportunities in terms of their position, the fact that they straddle the border, the fact that they operate on both sides of the border. They are concerned of the potential of further red tape being put in place, which could, I suppose, restrict some of those benefits. So how has that been looked at the moment, and how do we ensure that what benefits we can have when we leave the EU, that they're maximised and there's not further red tape put in place which will prevent any growth in those areas?
Victor, do you want to pick up? I guess the question now is about an extension of the consultation and the feedback that we've had from stakeholders about the implementation of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes back to that point we discussed earlier, that we need to understand how that Freeport model that is being proposed and can be further designed to make sure that it can live and manage the complexities of the protocol in all of this, so that it's operable and delivers benefits here in the way that ports, producers, and all other stakeholders want to see. So I think do we have answers to all of those questions at the minute? No, we don't, but we continue to ask them, and I think it's important that we use the consultation process for our stakeholders to continue to ask them, and for us politically to continue to ask them. So there is further design to be put to this. Of course, there's further design to be put, to be clarified. Those will be important, I think, in answering your question about, well, will there be additional red tape in Northern Ireland? Will there be issues that could curtail some of the benefits here? I think we've got to continue to press on with that with HMG and UK government.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Thank you for that. I suppose that, the one bit of clarity that we do have in this last couple of days is the fact that, the UK government aren't seeking an extension. Now, there will be people who will be happy at that. There will be others who are concerned at that, and everybody will have their view. Is there timescales in relation to some of these processes? Obviously, the Freeport issue is one. In terms of the timescales, we know the consultation closed 13th of July. Is there a turnaround as to when further detail will then be made available, or when the findings, will there be a report or a summary published? How will we get a response on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, the Freeports model, the actual implementation of it, and when it, when there would be announcements and all of that, that still is to be determined. It isn't necessarily linked or contingent upon, the date of EU exit, the end of this year. So that timeline for an announcement implementation is still to be still to become clear, I mean there is a sort of expectation that HMT will take away the responses that they get to the consultation, will consider those carefully. So I would expect that we will start to see some further whether announcements or a shape being put to this in the autumn.
Yeah, no, I welcome that, and I appreciate that they're not linked, and I wasn't suggesting that. I suppose what I was trying to get to is that many of those would see this as an opportunity, and we need to ensure that those opportunities are brought forward as soon as possible. We're not in a position where we have fully left the European Union, and we don't have any of these measures in place. I think that we need to ensure that they're brought forward and they're dealt with as quickly as possible. But I do have confidence that as you have said, that they will bring that forward when they have the findings. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Gary. Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks everyone for your presentation. I think most of my points have been raised. In relation to the common frameworks, I see we're going to get quite an excessive amount. We're talking 63 apply to Wales, 107 to Scotland, 151 to Northern Ireland. So we're certainly going to have quite an overload, I would say, in relation to dealing with that. Will a number of those frameworks apply to other areas, or are there that 151 specific to Northern Ireland?
I think Mary's left us again. So that the common frameworks is an issue that's dependent. To brought back.
I keep disappearing. Sorry about that. Those 151 frameworks was the original list that we started out with, along with the other DAs. That's now for DFE been brought down, I think, to about 29 that are of relevance to the department. A lot of those, again, on issues related to chemicals. So although it's still only 29, some of them will require quite a lot of kind of policy work. And obviously the protocol, even when it comes to frameworks, the protocol is relevant because the other DAs are also involved in putting together frameworks. A lot of them will not be legislation, so it won't have to go through actually the whole process. They will be enacted through more informal agreements, memorandum of understanding, for example, and then just cross agreements between the DAs and, as part of the UK. So I think we're less worried about frameworks, although obviously it is another set of work that we have to get through.
Okay, and just the point about, I suppose, the readiness of business for change. I suppose they're quite battle weary, a lot of businesses, over COVID, and it's had a terrible, it has taken a terrible hit, and I think the implications of it will be with us for some period of time. And the businesses here, as I've said before, are quite used to regulation, documentation, certification, certificates of compliance, and so on. Do you feel that there will be a lot of additional burden on them as a result of this, or is it in many cases going to be business as usual, but with a few extras?
I think that's so. In terms of across the piece, I think that very much depends on the type of business we're talking about and the trade that they're currently involved in. and then the trade that they'll be doing into the future. It won't be a one-size-fits-all by any stretch. I think certainly for our business population that are already engaged in sort of trades outside of Northern Ireland, and particularly outside of the EU, and of that population, those which are large businesses with the resources. When we speak to stakeholders, they demonstrate a level of confidence that they will be able to adapt to any new trading arrangements. The concern would be concentrated in those smaller businesses that just trade within these islands that up to now haven't had to do any of these processes. Throughout this conversation, we've mentioned that the nature and scale of them processes remain uncertain, so we don't yet know exactly what they'll have to do. I think useful that UK government has explained that import declarations are required for businesses that are purchasing from GB. That will be a new requirement. Businesses won't have had to do that before, particularly if they've never traded outside of the EU before. So that will be something they need to adjust and adapt to. And we need to understand if there are other sort of customs-related processes, goods regulations or VAT processes that will sit on top of that. So unfortunately, that there isn't a clear answer to your question, Mr. Dunn.
Okay. Obviously, it's important that support is given to businesses, and we're aware of the efforts of Intertrade, for example, who have addressed us. Invest NI, I take it, are stepping up to it. I'm aware that they have done some work on it, but something I suppose as a committee we should maybe look at a bit more closely about the support that's out there for businesses and the potential support. And unfortunately, we've been so overloaded by COVID that we've lost the focus on it. But I think it is important that we do continue to monitor that and make sure that businesses, small and large, are getting the right support and advice, because it's very much a bit of an ocean they're going into here, and people are not sure about how it's going to develop and all the implications of it. So I think it's important that we all work together to try and support business on the way through. So thanks very much, Chair, for that. Thanks, everyone, for your contribution.
John, David.
Paul, thank you for all the information thus far and the patience with the questions. The word risk has been used numerous times today. The department will have a risk register. So I'm just wondering, in terms of that risk register, is there reference to the risk to the continuity of departmental business, to the risk that legislation may not be properly scrutinised, or timescales? You may not be using these exact terms, but certainly the risk to legislative processes, and also the risk to the economy as a result of the process we're currently going through. Are they on the risk register? Maybe not in those terms, but certainly reference to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess our governance and accountability arrangements operate on two levels. That there is, as a department, obviously we report to our board and audit and risk committee. That our business plan was published. The risk register is being updated, particularly in light of COVID, but that's there. And then I think there's a second level which we operate, which is executive-wide. So through the EU Future Programme Board, which includes a risk register, and legislation is near the top of that, and it's a key concern across the NICS, and that's reflected. And also the lack of the uncertainty that we're currently facing into the time available for businesses to prepare and the potential impacts on businesses. That then compounded with the current conditions and the damage that has been done to the economy by COVID-19 up to this stage, and expectations that damage will worsen in the coming weeks and months, is a key concern for us.
Well, of course, COVID-19 should be on your risk register. Is Brexit on your risk register?
Yeah.
Will it be possible to have a copy of your risk register? Registers?
Yeah, we'll have to. I think we publish it as a matter of course. I know it's been updated at the moment. Would the committee be content if we checked with our corporate services and came back to you on that?
Yes, appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, John. Sinead?
Yeah. Just a question in relation to Article 8 around the VAT and excise rules. I know this is something that is really exercising businesses at the moment because they just don't know how it is going to operate, and another area that they need clarity in. Do we know in practice how they're going to operate west, east, east, west, and what form will it take going forward?
I'll cover that one if you don't mind. The short answer is no. We have very little information on what UK government is planning in terms of VAT and excise. I think the chair mentioned at the start of the meeting that you have a copy of the letter from which was their attempt to get some clarity, and they got very little information back other than that HMRC would run the system in taking account of Northern Ireland's position within the UK internal market. I met with chartered accountants yesterday. We really are aware this is an issue that, if you look at other tax changes in terms of VAT or excise, there's been years of preparation, and even so, there's had to be years of extensions to allow businesses to make the necessary changes. I suppose if you look at making tax digital, that was a massive change for business. Mm-hmm. This is potentially much more significant, and yet businesses will have some time, less than 6 months, to make changes to systems. Accountants told me yesterday some of those systems usually was a 2-year waiting period. It's I suppose there's no good answer to your question other than that it is an issue of real concern to us, and we keep raising it, but ultimately I believe Treasury and the Commission are having discussions, and Treasury are unable to disclose anything until those discussions have moved on, probably.
Yeah, I mean, we are a very micro business economy, and for major operational issues, for example, VAT to change, it's not something that can be turned around quickly, and that usually needs professional services to be involved in the process, and that requires a lot of money as well. So it is something that businesses are concerned about, and they have every right to be so. Okay, thanks.
And Julie, can I just pick up on that point very briefly, is that in practical terms, can some sort of transition be put in place for businesses around that? Is that part of the discussion at all?
We don't know what the discussions centre on, really. Practically, you would expect something like that, and that it's going to be very, very difficult if everything was to be in place in 6 months' time. Even for those administrative changes, businesses will probably need some time. But I can't. I don't know whether they are discussing a transition period or some sort of implementation. Say for 6 months or that. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Absent any time to prepare, businesses would need support in a big way, probably.
Okay. Well, look, thank you all for your briefings today. They're informative as always, and hopefully we will have you back soon as well with maybe a wee bit more clarity at some point. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thanks.
So we are going to ask to bring Janine Maher into the spotlight, please.
She is.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. So we're moving on here to item number 5, which is our oral briefing from Money and Pension Services. There is a clerk's memo at page 45 of your pack. There is a briefing paper from Money and Pension Service at page 48, and a letter from the service in relation to their rebuild plan for financial wellbeing in the north of page 69. and there is a briefing paper from the service in relation to the UK strategy for financial wellbeing at page 71. So welcome to the meeting, Janine, and if you would like to make an opening statement, and then we'll open it up to members for questions.
That's great, thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this morning and share a wee bit more about the work of Money and Pension Service in Northern Ireland. So my short presentation will focus on three main areas. Firstly, who are MAPS and what is the UK strategy for financial wellbeing. Secondly, our sort of understanding of COVID-19 impacts on financial wellbeing in Northern Ireland, and thirdly on our virtual roundtables that we've had in Northern Ireland, looking at how we look at a rebuild response to improve financial wellbeing in Northern Ireland. So I hope to demonstrate to you today that the work of the UK strategy for financial wellbeing can very much complement the work of this committee and the Minister in creating a recovery plan for Northern Ireland post-COVID-19. And really giving you that feedback from that extensive engagement series that we had over the month of May. So you've got the briefing pack that we put together for you on MAPS, but just some headlines for you. MAPS itself was established by the Financial Guidance and Claims Act on the 1st of January 2019, but we are continuing, as a new organisation, we are continuing work of legacy bodies, and I myself have been in post in our legacy bodies for 13 years, delivering the work of financial capability into financial wellbeing in Northern Ireland. And our vision is helping people, everyone, make the most of their money and pensions. As part of the legislation for the new body for Money and Pension Service, recognising the specific needs of each of the nations in the UK, MAPS was actually mandated to work closely with each devolved government, and we have a subcommittee of the MAPS board, which is just for devolved nation conversations, where we share the development of the UK strategy and our corporate strategy. So we're really recognising the needs for each country. We work very closely with the Department for Communities, and I was delighted that the Minister for Department for Communities agreed to co-sponsor the delivery plan for the UK strategy for Northern Ireland. So although there's an overarching UK strategy, we will have a delivery plan to meet the needs for each nation, and we're working really closely with Department for Communities to develop that for Northern Ireland. So MAPS itself has a lot of different touch points in how we serve the community across the UK. We had nearly 47 million hits to our website and visits to our website last year, and use of our tools, and we also syndicate quite a lot of content with other partners, and in fact provide a lot of syndicated content to the NI Direct website to support the money, tax and benefits section of NI Direct. And so far, the coronavirus and your money content that we've developed has had over 1 million visits, and I know we shared that with the Assembly Library to ensure that you have sight of that and it can be used with your own constituents. We also have a number of projects that are based in Northern Ireland, 4 different Pathfinder projects, which I can speak to you a wee bit about later on. We have pension guiders here, and we have our Pensions Operations Centre in Bangor. So we have quite a lot of activity across the UK and addressing the specific needs for people in Northern Ireland. The strategy for financial wellbeing. First of all, what is wellbeing? What is financial wellbeing? For us, this is about feeling secure and in control of your money. It's knowing that you can pay your bills and knowing that you can deal with the unexpected and that you're on track for a healthy future. But it's also knowing where to go for help and guidance and information when something happens. And you know, we've often talked over the years about when the worst case scenario happens. Well, COVID has given a prime example of testing people's financial resilience and highlighting how much information people need when their financial resilience is tested. MAPS launched the strategy on the 1st of April 2020, and we had a webinar for Northern Ireland, and a commitment that with that UK strategy that the delivery plan for Northern Ireland would meet both the needs of people in Northern Ireland and the policy context for Northern Ireland, and we would work with our key partners in Northern Ireland to really address this. We know that financial wellbeing isn't something that MAPS can address on its own. This is very much about driving forward a movement and a momentum over a 10-year strategy to address the key issues of financial wellbeing and support through our partner organisations to deliver that. The focus of the strategy has 5 measurable goals, and what we are forming those around are what we're calling agendas for change. And these 5 areas that we wish to drive forward change in, we feel from all of our research and our history of doing this, will have a significant impact in improving levels of financial wellbeing. So those five agendas, the first one being financial foundations. So this is around creating the right financial education and ensuring that children and young people in Northern Ireland are having a meaningful financial education so that they're prepared for the world of work and prepared to make those financial decisions. Through our legacy bodies, I worked with SIA over a number of years ago to embed financial capability in the school's curriculum in Northern Ireland. But this agenda for us is about driving forward how financial capability and financial education is delivered, providing the right support to teachers, and using all of the work that the financial services do and fund to create that momentum around that area. Second all is around a nation of savers, and this is around creating that resilience. We know from our evidence the number of people in the UK and particularly in Northern Ireland who have low levels of savings. So when something happens, they do not have a savings buffer to rely on. The third one then is looking at credit counts, and this is around driving down the numbers of people in the UK who are using credit to get by, so using it for food and bills, not for luxury items, but using it for everyday items. And then the cost of buying everyday items on credit facilities means that item becomes much more expensive for them. The fourth one is better debt advice. Debt advice was, as our legacy bodies, was something we were responsible for across the whole of the UK. In the new body, the funding for debt advice was devolved to the Department for Communities, but we know from all of our research and commissioning over the years across the UK that for debt advice, very few people present for debt advice, and in fact, it's in Northern Ireland, only 29% of people have access to debt advice they need. And it's around getting people to debt advice earlier, before they reach crisis and the debt mountain becomes too big to climb. And the last one is then looking at future focus. So this is supporting people throughout their working life to understand and plan for their later lives, and also when they've reached later life, decisions that need to be made in terms of drawing down on your pensions. So those are the 5 agendas for change that we're looking at. We also have cross-cutting themes within those agendas which affect all of them, and those are around gender and looking at the particular implications for women in all of those areas. Secondly, around mental health, because there's a direct correlation between mental health and mental well-being and financial well-being. And lastly, looking at the workplace, because we feel from all of our research and previous commissioning that the workplace is such an important avenue to reaching people and sharing that information and helping them make financial decisions. So those are our agendas. To meet these goals, as I said earlier, MAPS is very clear that this is something we need to do with the whole financial services sector, the advice sector, and all people involved in consumer information and knowledge. We have brought together a team of 145 specialists that are committed to help set the milestones for the 10-year journey for each of those agendas. And we have representatives from across the UK and representatives from Northern Ireland on those UK challenge groups. And I was really delighted the Irish League of Credit Unions, Young Enterprise, Advice and I, the Consumer Council, Mind NI and Cockney have been very involved in shaping at a UK level what the recommendations are for a 10-year level. And then drawing down on that, we've had our series of roundtables and a wide group of stakeholders to help us deliver and develop the delivery plan for Northern Ireland. So in terms of what we know and what we've heard about the impact on financial wellbeing in Northern Ireland, we already knew that pre-COVID, the financial wellbeing status in Northern Ireland probably meant we were in a worse position should something come. We already knew that of our segmentation, 49% of people in Northern Ireland fall into the struggling and squeezed categories, and only around 254,000 of those save on a regular basis. So in terms of having that savings buffer to cope with an income shock, fewer people in Northern Ireland have that than any other part of the UK. We also know that people in Northern Ireland are more likely, 11% of people in Northern Ireland use credit for food and bills, which is higher than any other part of the UK. We know that 61% of people in Northern Ireland don't feel they know enough to plan for their later life. And only half of our young people report having a meaningful financial education. And only 29%, as I said earlier, have access to the debt advice they need. We also know for Northern Ireland that 1 in 4 workers have lost sleep and money worries, and poor financial well-being is having an impact on their work life. And this is all pre-COVID. So a lot of the conversations that we've had with our stakeholders very much focusing on pre-COVID, it wasn't great. And then we know that there are going to be impacts on working lives and how people are managing their money going forward. A lot of our conversations are focused on mortgage forbearance, and a lot of the inactivity and the government support measures are staying any sort of crisis point coming. But while those interventions are there, people are not really feeling the true impact just yet. But a lot of the people we spoke to in our roundtable saying what might come when those forbearance measures end and when the government support packages end. So what MAPS are doing about it and what we are doing to address that and support people as we're going forward. Coronavirus has presented us all in Northern Ireland with a changed working environment and really changed what we anticipated the UK strategy would look like. And there's no doubt that the current economic forecast will have an impact on some of the measures that we were going to put in place at the start of the strategy. So in recognition of that, what we are doing, although it's a 10-year strategy, we have decided to have a rebuild response to focus on from now until 2021, looking at getting people back onto a level playing field, because the starting position that we started with is going to be worse. So we're focusing on, by the end of 2021, how do we get people back to where they originally started from as we look to rebuild and then improve and look to the 10-year strategy to improve the general well-being in Northern Ireland. To help us do that and understand what people in Northern Ireland are feeling, we had a series of roundtables across the month of May. And you know, the modern technology that we're all getting used to now and having the video conferences has really facilitated a much broader conversation. And we had these series of virtual roundtables with 100 attendees from 40 different external bodies. And what we looked at were each of those agendas of change that I mentioned earlier and the cross-cutting themes. And we looked particularly at the immediate implications of COVID on these and the longer term strategy, as well as what recommendations people might have for now. And we shared a lot of that in your briefing pack, and I'm happy to have some of those conversations with you later on or at a later date, should you wish to. So I just want to finish up, and conscious you've had a long morning. I just want to thank you for your time, and happy to take any questions you might have about how we can work with you, really addressing the need of financial well-being in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
She must be watching the meeting.
No, I did that.
Janine? Janine, we're getting feedback. If you're watching the live feed, if you can just mute that because we're getting some feedback. Sounds okay now.
Can you hear me still okay?
I can hear you, yes, thanks.
That's great, thank you. No, I think all of us will be very aware of the impact that finances can have on individuals, and it would be absolutely no surprise that people lose sleep and have poor mental health due to financial stress, and obviously that's a real concern at the minute, with COVID and the potential impact in the months ahead. Obviously, any kind of financial well-being strategy, and in particular here in the north, there's obviously structural issues. We have like over a quarter of workers who are earning below the living wage. We have a high level of economic inactivity, relatively speaking, and those are issues that would need to be taken into account in terms of the strategy. So I was just wondering how that all plays into it, and also in terms of you mentioned the kind of collaboration between financial services and advice sectors and everybody else in terms of this, the role of regulation and the likes of ending, the types of payday loans and, that really high cost credit. Is that being factored in as well?
Yes, it is. As one of our legacy bodies, we came from the regulator, so we came from the FSA. And as time has gone on, we have expanded and grew beyond the FSA. So we have a very close relationship with the FCA now, the Financial Conduct, and obviously Treasury and DWP as well. So over the years, this is the fourth financial capability stroke well-being strategy that I've worked on, but very much what we are focusing on this time is not just how do we address this and how do we work together, but what are the structural barriers that impact on somebody's ability to have financial well-being. So within our recommendations that are coming forward in the rebuild, you will see that there are structural recommendations in terms of what financial services can do, and issues like that. And I'm very willing to share. That's due to be published over the summer, and I'm very willing to share that with you when it's produced. But there are structural regulatory recommendations as well.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. That would be good to see. Gary, we'll bring you into the spotlight.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Janine, for that. Obviously, we all have a particular interest in this, given the fact that it affects people right across our communities, our neighbours, and including ourselves at many occasions, and that these issues do affect us over the course of our lifetime. In terms of the education piece, I do think it is important that we ensure that these financial issues are brought through our education system. I can only speak for myself, and when I attended school, it's not that long ago, there wasn't a huge amount of information, whether it be in terms of savings, borrowing, mortgages, credit ratings, what you needed to do the right thing and to not leave yourself in a position where you've huge amount of debts. And I think that it's something that we need to focus on. So I just want to maybe hear, Janine, how maybe you're working with the education system here in Northern Ireland to try and bring about that change and ensure that young people can get the best possible education that will set them up in terms of real life experiences.
Okay, thank you. So we work very closely with SIA, and a number of years ago we funded SIA to have a primary and a post-primary financial capability manager, and their role was to embed financial capability within the school's curriculum. I myself have 2 teenage children, so I'm looking for it in the work that they do. It's very much embedded in learning for life and work. And if you look at if you have children at GCSE age, you will see quite a lot of reference to it in learning for life and work. And throughout the primary curriculum, it's there. I think, having it in the curriculum is such a good thing. And we're the only part of the United Kingdom to have financial capability as a compulsory component of our curriculum. So we are ahead of the game there. I think what's our next ambition is to support teachers in the delivery of that. because just because it's in the curriculum doesn't mean we should expect teachers to be 100% comfortable with that. One of the things I'm working on this year, if you see Martin Lewis on the TV, every time he's on the TV, he has a book behind him, which is his Young Money book. So at the moment, Martin, with Young Enterprise Northern Ireland and MAPS, or myself and Martin Lewis, we are rewriting that book for Northern Ireland. So we have had a series of focus groups with young people about how we take that textbook and make it something that young people here will recognise, the language, the things that they're talking about. And that textbook will be delivered to all schools in Northern Ireland, as well as a teacher guide. And online content, because obviously we're recognising the teaching environment is different as well. So we're trying to respond to the need and provide content and supporting material that is useful in a Northern Irish context.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, and I do follow Martin Lewis's stuff. There's some useful information on there, not only in terms of, as you say, from a young person's perspective, but for all of us. You know, we all there's new technologies coming out, and we have to keep on top of all that. But what I do find is that it's those who are most vulnerable that are often caught by some of the most dangerous loans. And the chair talked about payday loans, and so dangerous, and the fact that absolutely it may get someone out of a very short-term issue, but the long-term impact of that in terms of the financial well-being, but their mental health is quite severe. So no, thanks for that, and hopefully we can hear from you again in the future. And obviously you're doing really strong and fantastic work, and I do want to thank you as well in terms of your organisation for the services that you do provide to our constituencies as well, because often we get through our assembly offices people who are in real despair, and at least we know where to signpost them to if there are issues that arise. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Something you're probably all going to receive, hopefully today, if not tomorrow. We've launched a new tool in response to COVID called a Money Navigator, and this is very much recognising the fact that although we're all in the same storm, we're not in the same boat, so we're not going to have the same journey in how we are coping with our finances. So the Money Navigator tool is in that space between money advice and debt advice, so helping people move through on an online platform, getting the right advice and guidance to meet their needs, and if they need debt advice, taking them to where they need to go. So we're very much trying to support people through whatever their personal situation is, and that's being launched today. So I will ensure you all get information through into your inboxes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sinead?
Okay, thank you, Janine, for that. And I would echo Gary's gratitude to your organisation. Never was it more important at the moment. And some of the figures that you've said, about 49% of working people in Northern Ireland fall into the struggling and squeeze categories, and that's pre-COVID. So that gives us an indication of where we're going, because the crisis hasn't actually hit crisis point yet. We're getting to it. We can see it. We can see it with the work that we do within our constituencies. That there is a lot of people really struggling. And I suppose if you think back to the film, and I mean it's one of the most moving and horrific films that I've seen, is I Am Daniel Blake, and everybody can be Daniel Blake. You know, it doesn't take a massive crisis to actually be on your knees. You know, it could be a couple of pay packets to your homeless, or a couple of pay packets to you have no food. So I'm really conscious of that, and Northern Ireland is expected to have a greater impact to the COVID in terms of the economy than any other nation within the United Kingdom. And you know, it's something we've high levels of debt here, we've very low levels of savings, and traditionally we have low income. Our jobs don't pay as much in Northern Ireland as they do elsewhere. So it's something that we all have to be very mindful of. And sometimes when we're talking about economic recovery, we're talking about, you know, businesses growing and of course, because that's how we get out of it. But you know, we really have to have some kind of mechanism where we actually catch people, you know, and don't let them be destroyed. through this. Now, and just in that there, I mean, you mentioned Martin Lewis, and honestly, he's one of my heroes. He's one of the people that I look at and I really admire, because I think he does great work and he reaches out and he speaks at the level where people understand him. But one of the things that has been discussed quite a way, through this here, is the issue of universal basic income. What's your thoughts on that, Janine? Is it something that you as an organisation are discussing among other support mechanisms?
Well, I suppose that's a policy decision that would come from central government. What we tend to do and how we address these issues is looking at when policy decisions are made at that level. We're the people that take that information and translate it into something that the ordinary person can understand, because there's a lot of jargon, particularly in financial services, and there's a lot of confusion caused by terminology. So our role is really to translate that into something that people can understand and how it relates to them. Obviously, we have a very close relationship with Treasury and DWP, but we're very much focusing on the universal support that we can provide and who can access our services.
And I think that we're probably going to have to get into that area of policy going forward if the numbers and the figures are what we expect them to be from some of the economic forecasts. And you identified as well in your presentation that we might all be in the same, but we're not all in the same boat. We might be in the same place, but we're not in the same boat. But you particularly mentioned women, and I see young people as well. In relation to being more impacted because they are predominantly, I suppose, employed in those shutdown business sectors, and that'll give rise to further economic inactivity. Have you given any consideration of just particular interventions to particular groups in relation to financial well-being?
And we do have a number. Of projects that are going now that are looking at particular groups. So we have a project with Freedom Partnership, which is looking at particularly young people. It's a youth transitions project. So it's looking at people that are transitioning from school to work or school onto universal credit and helping them with the decision-making process they're at that time. So that is one particular project, and that is available online, and I can send you the information about that. And it's particularly aimed at young people because we know they are more impacted with their employment situation. We also have two other projects, one with NIACRO, which is a family support project. So it's trying to support the family and the implications on the children, because we know your financial behaviours are influenced by your family and your family experience with money. So that family support one is looking at particularly vulnerable families. And then we have another project called Talk, Learn, Do, which is a train the trainer. So people supporting families, and how do we bring the money guidance and how do we bring money conversations in, because a lot of our experience and a lot of our research is telling us that money is the one subject that people do not want to talk about, and it's particularly prevalent in Northern Ireland, and even in COVID it's still something that people won't talk about and still have this issue about sharing or talking about their money worries and fears. So a lot of our interventions that we have four, and we've also got another one in Uri, which is a local community partnership. A lot of those are trying to bring people to the sources of information that are already there and break down those barriers to engage with services, because engagement is the big issue, and normalising the conversation so people will access the services they need. But in terms of targeting ones, we have that vulnerable support through NIACRO, the youth transitions through READ, and the local community partnership in Uri, which is bringing together the credit union, the community advice centre and the community partnership to create a community navigator to work with vulnerable people in that area.
Well, thank you once again, Janine. Keep up the good work, and there'll be plenty for you to do.
I think so. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sinead. Can we bring Claire into the spotlight, please?
Good morning, Janine. Thank you, Chair. I suppose that my question picks up a little bit on what the Deputy Chair was talking about in relation to, I suppose, debt management within communities. There have been a number of programmes across Northern Ireland where community and voluntary organisations have been providing a debt management service, which has been really useful because of I suppose, mental burden of people knowing that there is a pathway to finding themselves out of debt. My second point I would raise, anecdotally, I'm noticing that to be able to apply for credit is getting much more difficult, and it seems that interest rates are rising. And I suppose if we're looking at debt management, maybe we're not able to apply for credit, but naturally, I think some people will turn toward that, and there will be an impact, particularly if our interest rates are increasing. I think that's as a direct result of COVID-19 and the difficulties that we're seeing there. So I'm just keen to hear your thoughts on that second point, and then also in relation to the community and voluntary sector around supporting people who find themselves in debt and how they can find a pathway out of that. Thank you.
So in terms of the community and voluntary sector, as I mentioned before, MAPS, we funded directly the debt advice services in Northern Ireland, and then that was devolved down to DFC. But we work very closely with them, and in a COVID environment, we have established a debt task force, which is really bringing together both the voluntary and community sector in Northern Ireland, DFC, and all the debt charities across the UK, so Step Change, Citizens Advice, all of those organisations, because we're very much focused on how do we learn from each other's experiences, how do we share better ways of working and share training, share all of that in terms of response. So that's one of the ways in that debt task force that we're bringing everybody together in a collaborative environment. And that Money Navigator tool that I mentioned earlier, that was done in collaboration with all of those organisations to design a client journey that people would engage with. And because we know the debt advisors have got more experience than any of us in terms of knowing what people respond to. So we do work very closely for that. In terms of your response to asking about people applying for credit, we absolutely are seeing two sides of the coin. We're seeing some people are saving more at the moment because their spending has gone down. Conversely, depending on your employment situation, people are applying for credit. And I really do think that we are not going to know how bad that is until forbearance and support measures end. And it is something we're all just going to have to be mindful of. There is an affordable credit element in that credit counts. So some of the work that we're doing is looking at how we can support organisations to deliver affordable credit for people who may not be able to access mainstream. Fair for All Credit are chairing that group in the UK position, and some of the recommendations they're making are how we can use the dormant account money across GB to provide that support for affordable credit. Fair for All are only funded for GB. I think the proportion of the dormant accounts has, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's with the Department of Economies. So there may be a conversation to have at some point around how, I think it's gone to the lottery, but how we can look at the learnings from affordable credit pilots in GB and apply those to Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks. Is that essentially saying that we don't have any sort of safeguarding in relation to affordable credit and what people in Northern Ireland can apply for? I suppose that's, that is something that I would certainly support, that that we can ensure that people, if they're applying for a credit, that they can afford to pay it back, so that they don't find themselves in a much more complicated situation.
I know that the Consumer Council for Northern Ireland have received some funding from Treasury to work on affordable credit, and we are part of that. And it's very much around who can provide affordable credit in Northern Ireland. And where that's part of our recommendations are on our rebuild document is accessing affordable credit in Northern Ireland and how people could do that.
Okay, great.
And alongside that as well, one of our strategic things that we've done in the debt landscape is building in a savings element into somebody in the debt journey, so that the standard financial statement, which is used in a debt journey, we've mandated savings into that so that people build a savings buffer even though they're in a debt situation. So creating that savings habit helps them become more financially resilient in the longer term.
Yeah, no, it's all really makes sense, and I think that's, you know,
Welcome to your conference.
no, it's about, I suppose, removing that debt, but then, you know, a longer term kind of approach to finances.
Yeah.
Sarah, just to pick up on the point around the dormant accounts and what exists in GB, could we get an update maybe from the Department for Communities around that work, and if that's something that, you know, we could look at here in Northern Ireland?
No problem, Claire.
The conference entry code you entered is invalid.
Yeah, that's not good.
Welcome to...
Okay,
We
we need to switch.
You see, you're having a way of switching from one to another today.
Yes.
So just bear
Okay.
with us, Chair. The Starleaf is about to end. It ends at noon, and we're just switching into teleconferencing, just putting in an enormous amount of pressure on Tommy. All intended.
Welcome to your conference. Please enter your passcode followed by hash. Once in your call, to hear a list of your conference controls, please press hash, then 0. The conference entry code you entered...